With us now is Robert Gibbs, who was White House press secretary for President Obama. He's now an MSNBC contributor, along with Kori Schake, who served in numerous positions under President George W. Bush, including on his National Security Council and at the State Department. Welcome, both of you. Let's talk about what this means in terms of where we are going in this country. Robert, with these picks, who you've worked with in the past, worked with in the Obama administration, is this going to be what some are going or have gone so far as to say, is the Obama third term?
No, I don't believe so, because I think if you look at the issues that this administration faces, one, there are a lot more of them, even given what we inherited in 2008 and into 2009. But if you look at issues like immigration or climate change, there are new solutions that have to be dived into here in order to make progress. Secretary Kerry spoke pretty eloquently about this around climate change. And I think the idea that you can do what worked or what was planned in 2008 or 2009 or 2010 just really doesn't work anymore. I was struck by the fact that they underscored the idea of truth-telling. They underscored the idea of believing in science and about having honest conversations with the principal. So I think as these picks are restorative in nature, they're also the repairing of those norms that I think are crucially important for how this administration sees its place, not only in Washington, but in the world.
Robert, what policies do you see being reversed with the nominees that Joe Biden has so far chosen?
Well, look, I think just writ large, I think the focus on foreign policy will be fundamentally different. I think the idea of an American first foreign policy is gone, and you heard that enumerated today, on the idea that the United States leading is what makes the world and this country strongest. I think, obviously, as I mentioned, the climate change policies, and without a doubt, the immigration policies that you've seen, the challenges that we've had, particularly across our southern border, and some of the real draconian policies that have been instituted by the Trump administration. I think all of those you will see as a reversal. And I think that was underscored today, and interestingly so, in having each of these nominees speak at the same press conference in which they were introduced.
Kori, same question to you.
I do think it's a return to roughly 70 years of American foreign policy based on the belief that we are most secure and most prosperous when we are actively, constructively engaged out in the world, shaping events in a positive direction. But you've seen lots of variance across the 70 years, and I think the challenges that this team will face will largely be driven by events. But I agree that you'll see major changes on immigration. You'll see major changes on climate policy. You'll see major changes on the friendliness with which we engage America's allies around the world to manage big challenges like the rise of an aggressive China.
What about the Iran deal? Are we going to try to get back into that?
President-elect Biden has said that, and Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, was one of the major architects of the deal. So I'd be very surprised if they haven't already been thinking about, how do we put this genie back in the bottle? How do we get control over the 12-fold increase in low-enriched uranium that Iran has undertaken? How do we bring China and Russia back into the sanctions portfolio? How do we bring our European friends back to the table?
There is some concern out there that I've read that a Joe Biden administration might fall into the same traps that led to Donald Trump being elected in 2016. The same frustration among some, middle of the road or conservative Democrats who changed over to Donald Trump in 2016, or some progressive Democrats who felt like Obama did not go far enough, wasn't the revolutionary that they had hoped for. Robert, how does Joe Biden avoid doing that in this next administration? And do you think that these cabinet picks signal that he is trying to move past it, as he said, said. He said this is not a return to normalcy. It is not a return to the, I mean, it's a return to normalcy, but not a return to the status quo. He's moving forward by choosing such a diverse cabinet with different lived experiences and making some history-making choices for nominees.
Yeah, look, I think the diversity of voice is going to be one that will be interesting to watch. And to my earlier point, again, I think the idea that this is going to be the same policies that you saw early in the first Obama term, I think just aren't the case. I think what you'll see, again, on climate will be what meets the moment of what needs to happen in order to get countries back into a climate change regime. But to your point, look, I think I don't expect this to be revolutionary in the sense, but I do think it will be different in terms of policy. I think as it relates to, that conservative idea of Democrats who might have gone to Trump. Look, I think it's incumbent upon this administration, as it is every administration, to make a forceful case about why a foreign policy with America helping to lead, with America working with our allies and our neighbors to move forward on things that make lives better for the American people. That's important, and that isn't something that begins or ends. It's something that has to be restated every single day so that people understand it's not just the policies, it's the aim of those policies that are important.
Corey, let me read you something from Vox. This is Emma Ashford to Vox, arguing that Biden might want to take on a few of Donald Trump's foreign policy characteristics, some of his style. It would be nice to see Biden adopt a little of Trump's flexibility in foreign policy affairs. Most of Trump's strange policy choices came from the fact that he didn't know or care much about foreign affairs, but it was also sometimes a benefit in that he was unconstrained by "this is how we've always done it" thinking. What do you think of that?
I don't agree with Emma on that. I actually think you can see the American public reacting to it. Donald Trump was great at raising first-order questions like, aren't immigrants taking Americans' jobs? Or why don't allies do more for their own defense? And those are interesting and important questions, but the public doesn't like Donald Trump's answer to them. You've seen enormous shifts in public attitudes in favor of immigration, in favor of alliances, and in favor of trade in Donald Trump's presidency because of the policies he's chosen. And I think that leaves a much wider window for the Biden administration to re-engage on those issues in ways that keep America safe and prosperous. And I found his cabinet appointments, including Janet Yellen for Treasury, reassuringly boring. They're qualified, they're competent, they're going to handle these problems just fine.
That is something I have been hearing from quite a few folks. Kori Schake, thank you so much for joining us. Robert Gibbs, thank you for joining us as well. It's been great to have both of you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.